Hello, good morning, everybody. Today is Wednesday, March 12th. I'm John Weigell here with Juliet, Bennett, and this is the Hustle Daily Show. VR capabilities run the gamut, but the latest might be empathy. A few companies like Habitat XR are taking people into nature and the lives of animals using VR, and researchers say that it might be a good way to make humans actually care about the environment. So can VR be an empathy vehicle, or is that just not realistic? We'll chat about that in a bit, but first, let's give you the news in business and tech. First off, Southwest Airlines is ending its decades-long perk of free checked bags for tickets purchased on or after May 28th, with some exceptions there. It's a big departure from the airline's policy, which set it apart from its other competitors. The 2 bags fly free is a registered trademark on its website, and one spurred by activist Elliott Investment Management, which took a stake in the airline last year. Southwest predicts that it will gain $1 billion to $1.5 billion from charging for checked bags, but will lose $1.8 billion of market share. So them's the breaks. From there, we go to Tesla. Tesla has officially lost all of its gains since its November presidential election spike. The stock dipped 15% on Monday. It's down 40% so far in 2025, and the EV company has lost about $127 billion in revenue. Boy. Elon Musk admitted that there has been some, quote, difficulty running the company, but that it should be fine in the long term. And from there, we go to Texas. A 55-year-old Texas software developer is facing jail time for sabotaging the company he worked for a decade. According to the Department of Justice, Davis Liu wrote malicious code sent to trigger in the event he was terminated, which happened on September 9th, 2019. Juliet, can you tell me more about this right here?
Big fan of this guy. Do I recommend his behavior? No. Do I find it endlessly amusing? Yes.
Yes.
Apparently, the code deleted coworker profiles, locked people out of the system, ultimately cost the company thousands of dollars in losses.
Oh my God.
You know, to even do this, I feel like you must suspect that this company is going to screw you over. Like, otherwise, why would you do that? And, you know, I guess he was right. The unfortunate thing for him is that now he has been convicted of causing intentional damage to protected computers. I think it's funny because it's not funny, but he faces 10 years in prison, and that's how long he worked at this company. So, okay.
Interesting.
Funny, but don't do that, actually. Read about this guy for your wish fulfillment if you feel like you're in a job that doesn't care about you.
Yeah, live vicariously through him, but do not do what he did, definitely. Mm-hmm. From there, we go to China. This fall, Beijing is making AI courses mandatory for all of its students, even elementary school kids. The capital city will mandate 8 hours of AI instruction per year for each student starting in the fall. And finally, Buffalo Wild Wings is rolling out a pair of goggles that allow the wearer to watch multiple TVs at once. Give it to them, Buffalo Wild Wings. The $10 B-Dubs Vision goggles have 4 arms and 5 mirrors just in time for March Madness, and a 23% increase in wing orders. With 2.3 billion portions consumed, it's going to be a wild time at Wild Wings. And talking about goggles, talking about VR, companies like Habitat XR are creating immersive VR experiences, not just to watch 17 sports at the same time, but to make people actually care more about nature. But before we get into if it actually can work, Juliet, can VR actually trigger empathy in your perspective and in your research?
Well, that's a great question that we're still talking about. We've been talking about this for a long time with VR, which is why I thought it was interesting that this was coming back around. You know, people used to call VR an empathy machine, that it was so immersive that you could put a viewer in someone else's shoes and they would feel more compassion for whatever the situation was. And there have been studies that have indicated that can be the case. There was a Stanford study in which researchers found that participants who watched a video about homelessness, and, obviously calling it a video is sort of diminishing what VR is because, you think of a video, you think of a 2D experience. This is obviously a 3D experience.
Sure.
They watched a 7-minute VR experience about homelessness, and researchers found that they developed compassion that was longer lasting than those who engaged with the same topic in other forms of media. I personally think about a VR experience that I did about a year ago a lot, and I believe that it's at South by Southwest right now. It's called In the Current of Being. It was the story of a transgender woman who had survived electroshock conversion therapy. And she tells her story while you, the viewer, are wearing a lot of haptic equipment. So you have like a vest and gloves. And so as she's talking about being shocked, you feel those vibrations.
Wow.
And I do think about that a lot. I feel like had I just watched a video without the haptic feedback, I might not remember it as clearly as I do because it was so visceral at the time that I watched it. Like it really made me have to think about what it would have been like to be her at that time, and to have to undergo these unnecessary treatments. So yeah, I think VR is an empathy machine. I think that it is possible. But, I also know that I've read a lot of books and watched a lot of 2D media where I have also felt a lot of empathy or compassion about the topic being discussed. And, there's studies that are like, yes, absolutely, this can happen. And then there's studies that are like, can it? Like, is it really more effective than a book or any other form of media? So, I think the answer is both yes and no.
Yeah, it seems a bit too early to tell in that instance, but it seems like a couple companies are banking on that it is the case.
Right.
With showing people immersive realities about nature or about animals or about the environment.
Right. So this particular article, which is in the BBC, the reporter Becca Warner wrote about a VR experience that made her cry because she had to watch an animal starve to death due to climate change. She felt really bad for this animal. And the company that put the experience out, Habitat XR, its founder has said that this is typical. He'll bring this experience to these fancy galas, and these people who have lots of money will cry during these VR experiences, even though they're not on the ground in these areas. And previous studies have found that participants are more likely to sign a petition after seeing an experience, to engage in conservation practices within their home after watching an experience about the environment. So there is some indication that, yeah, this type of stuff affects people in ways that inspires them to change or take action.
Sure. Whereas maybe reading something would not do as much potentially. I can see the argument there that being immersed in this kind of environment, seeing this thing happen, real or not, means that maybe you have more of an attachment towards it. I guess that's what they're kind of banking on. This is all great, obviously, but at the same time, it seems like people are also arguing that it doesn't really work and that it doesn't do that, which would kind of put all this to shreds.
Right. One of the arguments that I read, and the argument that I read that I liked the most about this not working, it's a blog called Small Potatoes. The author is Paul Bloom. And it's funny because he's a psychologist, and he talks about how a lot of these experiences do occur at fancy fundraising activities where these people have the ability to just walk away from whatever they saw. And they're often novel and fun. It's often like, yeah, sure, I'll try this VR experience. It's fun. And, maybe it's a little too fun. Also, these experiences are short, they're kind of limited, and you can walk away from them at any time.
Yeah.
You can be in the shoes of someone who is suffering, and then you take your headset off and you're back to your real life.
Sure.
So those are some of the limitations. I think the limitations that we can potentially address are the ones that are technological, because we can't force people to be in, very bleak real world Black Mirror style. You can't get out of this chair simulations,
right?
But we can improve the technology and try to make them more immersive. Some of that is higher resolution, better frame rates. And then some of that is the stuff that I talked about with that earlier experience. It is the sort of haptic feedback. I looked and I found there are 73 haptic tech startups just in the US alone, people that are trying to make VR that you can touch. And then there's other even weirder startups that are trying to make VR that you can smell or that you can even taste. So I think, the more sensory experience that we can add to VR, the better. And I think one thing that VR has that a book or a 2D media doesn't have necessarily is that while you can escape it, a lot of people choose not to. And in our attention economy where we're just constantly scrolling and like watching 30 TikTok videos in a row, being immersed in a headset, I think, is similar to being in a movie theater where you're not supposed to be on your phone.
Sure.
Like if you're at home watching an episode of TV and you're just scrolling and you're doing a bunch of other stuff, you don't remember that piece of media as well as when you go to the theater and you're not allowed to do those things.
Right. There's that lack of focus versus kind of being in a headset and not even being able to see outside of it. At least if you're not wearing a Vision Pro, I guess.
Right.
But yeah, there is that element of focus here that I think is very important as opposed to a 2D video or a piece of paper, So it seems like this has legs, though. I feel like even though it's inconclusive whether it actually works or not, seems like kind of the best chance there is to actually get people immersed in nature without going into nature themselves.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of benefit here, not just for the nature stuff, but for any sort of like social messaging that you're trying to get across. And I think now more than ever, people are looking for those experiences and looking for those ways to both disconnect and connect at the same time. The one thing that VR can't do, and this is interesting to me, is it cannot replicate the wellness benefits that we get from being in nature.
Yeah.
It falls a little short of that. But VR nature is apparently better than no nature. So if you're the kind of person that's in a big urban environment and you don't get to spend a lot of time in the forest, then maybe one of these experiences would benefit you in some way or make you care about things in some way.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, you'll probably just need a vitamin D pill, I guess.
Exactly. And maybe we should start caring about nature now before we all live in a subterranean underground where we don't remember what the sun feels like. And this is the only way that we can know what a forest feels like is through our VR headsets. That's like a cyberpunk dystopia future.
That is cyberpunk dystopia. We should get to work on that graphic novel immediately.
Yeah, exactly. It's like in Blade Runner where there are no real animals. And so they like have robot frogs and stuff.
Yeah. Like replicated animal types. Yeah, that's where we're going.
Someone's going to come at me and be like, that's not in Blade Runner. And you're right. I'm sorry. That is in the book. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep.
Okay.
Is where they have the robot. I mean, it's sort of in the movie, but the frog is actually in the book. Yes.
The mystery's been solved.
Yes. I know. Because someone's going to be like, what are you talking about?
All right, and that's going to do it for us today. Thanks for tuning into the Hustle Daily Show. We're a proud part of the HubSpot Podcast Network. Our editor today is Robert Hartwig, and our executive producer is Darren Clark. We've got a ton more tech and business coverage in our newsletter. If you're not subscribed, go get signed up at thehustle.co/email and follow us on Instagram at The Hustle Daily and start reading for that robot frog. We will see you tomorrow.